The great Mahatma Gandhi said, "Speak only if it improves upon the silence." Welcome to the Guyana Dialogue. I am your hostess, Shamiza Ali. Good evening to everyone joining us on Facebook and on YouTube. Today, I would like to take this opportunity to ask you to call or visit someone you love dearly. Life is short. Tonight, our discussion will be on clearing up misconceptions and looking to the future of bauxite and other resources and US Guyana relations. The Guyana Dialogue is being sponsored by a coordinating council of Guyanese based in the US, UK, Canada, Guyana, and the Caribbean. Funding support is by well known philanthropist Dave Narayan from Dave West Indian Imports. Please welcome my moderators for tonight, Dr. Tara Singh. Welcome, Dr. Tara.
Thank you very much.
And Professor Ganga Das.
Thank you. Thank you.
Welcome, both of you. It's a pleasure to have you here this evening. Samuel Archibald Anthony Hinds, he was born December 27, 1943. He's a Guyanese politician who served continuously from 1992 to 2015. He's Guyana's ambassador to Washington. He served as Guyana's president and prime minister. He's an engineer by profession and hails from Linden. Please welcome His Excellency Samuel Hinds. Good evening and welcome. Pleasure having you here this evening. Dr. Tara, please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you very much, Samita, and Your Excellency, Ambassador Sam Hinds. We welcome you to this program again. I know the last time we met with you, we only had about 15 or 20 minutes, and there were so many issues we had to raise with you. Now we are trying to make up for that a bit. But before we start, I just want to announce to the viewership the new development getting British Airways to come to Guyana via St. Lucia. That is remarkable because in the UK, we still have about 70,000 Guyanese living there. And so that is a welcome development. Now, today, I've been reading several articles and letters in the newspaper where people seem to get a jaundice or an inaccurate view of bauxite, for example. They blame the PPP of not saving the bauxite industry, blame the PPP for the decline of the bauxite industry. I know you were heads on, you were directly involved in that. One of the most common criticism is that because Linden happens not to be a PPP traditional constituency, that is why. So we'd like you to clarify some of those misconceptions and give us a little background on that situation.
Thank you, Dr. Tara. And good evening to the moderator and our hostess, and good evening to all our viewers in North America and in Guyana. Yes, to address the question of bauxite, it was quite a few years after I'd been in bauxite that I read an article that was made by the Jamaica Bauxite Institute, and the title was A Life Cycle Approach to Bauxite Areas. And it spoke that all companies and all situations, they tend to grow initially because they have advantages, but over time, others come up and with new advantages, and then the original place, the production kind of levels off, and then it goes into decline. And they spoke about Guyana. Our Guyana bauxite was the big thing in the 1920s, but then already by the 40s, after the World War II in particular, there was a great search for bauxite all over the world, and Jamaica was discovered and developed. Guinea was discovered and developed, And when I came out university and started working in '67, Australia was just being brought into production. And both Guinea and Australia are the big ones, and Australia has been number one producer, at least for alumina, all the while. So the bauxite operation started. It should be considered mature already by the time we nationalized it in 1971, and already by 1975 it had started showing signs of difficulties. In fact, it started losing money, and it had some interventions from the multilateral institutions and then from countries together, the European countries together, to try to revive it. And when we came into office, when the PPPC came into office in 1992, it found, or it met, or there was an agreement between the outgoing PNC administration and the multilaterals, that the multilaterals had just put in some money, and they had put in an international manager, and the arrangement was that manager was financed for 2 years, 92 to 94, and at the end of that period, he was to say whether he thought the bauxite operation would be viable, profitable or not. If it was to be profitable, there was a commitment to immediately privatize it. And if it was not, if it didn't seem that it could ever be profitable again, it was to be closed immediately. And no more money from the Treasury was to be spent in subsidizing the bauxite. This is the agreement that the PPPC met when we came into office in 1992. And in 1994, the Australian company reported that it couldn't see the bauxite operation getting profitable. And therefore, according to the agreement that we met from the PNC, we should have closed it down. We didn't. We found all sorts of ways to continue subsidizing it. Of course, at that time, there were various institutions, the World Bank and the IMF and the IDBs, overlooking our shoulders. And I think to some extent, they also understood, some of the individuals in Guyana that were doing the overlooking also understood that we couldn't just close down and like that. But we had to be taking steps to try to reduce the subsidies that would be needed from the government. And so we continued subsidizing the bauxite, which was against the arrangement. But we continued doing it, and we continued looking and working towards opportunities to privatize it. And there came along the OMI group, which was doing some work on contract. They eventually said, we'd like to have a go at it. And we made the arrangement. So they were in charge of it. I think 70% or so of the shares they got large controlling interest, and things were going well. And then after, I think, about a year, they ran into a position where they didn't have sales for some period, and they said, we have to stop the operations for 2 months at least. And immediately, without the thinking, our president at the time, Mr. Bharat Jagdeo, said, the government will provide minimum base pay for everyone, 40 hours a week, standard pay for everyone in the operations, but everyone has to spend some time each week learning on computers, learning some things about computers. And so we put that in place. But then the OMI people themselves, Cambior, they had other problems come up, and then they were bought out, and the new people said, close down the operations. We give you 6 months to either hand it over to somebody else or close it out and walk away. So we were involved again, and then the Chinese company Bosai came along, and Cambier Omai privatized to them, and we supported it, and so that is how the operation has continued. And the operation has continued, and it has been uh, direct subsidies to the bauxite operations hadn't gone on maybe since it was first privatized to OMI, but we've kept the huge subsidy to the electricity supply in Linden, an arrangement with the company. It was originally a company tongue. I think it goes back to the 50s, where the price paid for electricity is a nominal one, and that we have maintained. So we went out of our way. We went out of our way to maintain bauxite because we were always committed to all the people of Guyana, and so we kept that going.
Thank you. The Umai company was, you said they own about 70% of the shares. The other 30% was owned by the government or
I
some
think
other company.
it's been some time I've been away from it, but I think the split there was 70-30. And in the case of the Berbice operation, it might have been 90-10. But I've been away from it for some time now, and I can't clear.
But the Bosai Mining Company, they currently have 100% share.
70, I think it's 70%. I'm not sure. And it would have evolved. It would have evolved since the beginning, since the first arrangement. I have not kept track of it, but they have controlling interest. They're controlling interest in the bauxite.
Let me just ask you another question on Rusal and Kokwani mines. They have closed down. They had an industrial dispute where they blocked the river, and Rusal moved out of the country, and there seemed to be a stalemate. There's no action, but we spoke to the Minister of Labor, and he said he got some kind of inkling that the Minister of Natural Resources might be negotiating with them to come back. You have any update or any status report on that?
No, I must thank you for that update myself. I have not been in contact with what's happening in the Berbice bauxite operations. It was we felt very disappointed as to the way things developed there because we put in a lot of work. The PPPC government during that period put in lots of work and went very far in trying to attract investors and to keep investors going and to keep those operations going for the good of Region 10 and the people in Region 10.
Well, I hope the Minister of Natural Resources can make some substantial progress there, because
it's not him alone, you know. It's the other side, the bauxite company, and it is also the workers and the people. I'm sure that he would go as far and.
Yeah, I understand, but what I was implying, he should take a leadership role in that, because there are 600 employees there, and while some of them may be re-employed, I can still imagine quite a lot of them still on the breadline. So it's very important that the government try to work out some kind of arrangement with the union, the bauxite company, to get this moving again. The reason why I specifically asked about the bauxite, because of this usual criticism where people are saying the government didn't do enough, and they make comparison now that sugar has been subsidized about $6 billion per annum from 2020 to 2022, which is correct. Bauxite has been subsidized to for about 3.2 billion per year, because right now the bauxite, the 10,000 families, they pay just $5 per kilowatt hours, where the general population pay about $64. So I'm not against that. What I'm saying, that when people draw comparisons,
I could say I would say also that uh, even though I was in the bauxite and we all worked very hard to keep it going because of a number of reasons, because it was being there were new areas developing with greater advantages. Prices on the marketplace were less than we required. I would say our bauxite operations have been receiving support since about 1976, all the way through. I think about 15 million US a year for a long time, even in the years of the PNC, and then we continue too.
Thank you. Just before we leave this, I think Dr. Ganga would like to ask a question on gold and diamond
Yeah.
and the role of OMI and some other companies, specifically in relation to cyanide, the pollution there, that big outbreak they had in 2007, then again in 1995 or something like that. But the alumina plant that was planned for Linden, that whole idea had to be shelved because of market considerations, or what?
I don't know which one you were referring to, which particular things you were referring to.
The alumina plant that
The alumina plant was closed in 1983, before the PPPC went into office, but it was closed in 1983 because of costs of production were running high. As I was saying, from about 1975, the bauxite operations in Linden were not making a profit, and in fact, maintenance and so on were suffering. There was not money to do the maintenance as it was required, and so operations got more and more difficult and more costly, pretty steadily on from 1976 onwards. And the aluminum plant was closed in 1983. Partly because our cost of operation there was above the world market price at the time. So it was closed.
So in effect, what you're saying is that the bauxite, contrary to critics, the bauxite company was not treated unfairly by the PP administration.
No, not at all. No, the bauxite operations and the Region 10 citizens have not been treated unfairly by the PPPC. In fact, I was there, and interestingly, the new Prime Minister has a significant Linden background. And I would say too, many people don't know that President Jack Deo, when he first came and worked in the Ministry of Finance, he, I think, did about a 2-week study on the ground with 2 or 3 with a team, which included some young economists who were out of Linden too, and so he knows the area pretty well, and he understands it pretty well, and I can remember it on our discussions at times. He says, the area needs inputs of money, and we look for ways to try to get monies inputted into the region. And for example, I guess that would have been the thinking behind his very prompt position when OMI had said that they had to close for 2 months, and he said immediately, we'll close. We'll supply. The government will supply minimum wage, 40 hours a week for the standard month's pay for over the 2 months period, but we require everyone to spend some hours each week at a class, a formal class classes that would be set up. And interestingly, some of my other people in sugar said, you see, this PPPC government, they're treating the bauxite people better than they treat us in sugar. They pointed them to computers, the thing of the future, and they initiating them into it. So maybe only half of the people will make use
Mm.
will be affected positively by the course, but they're going to computers, and they're saying PPPC government want to keep us on the estates cutting cutting cane. So
Mhm.
we got the criticisms both ways,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
and maybe that is a sign that you're somewhere in the middle. Maybe you're somewhere in the
Mm.
middle.
All right, thank you, Ambassador. Now I pass it on to Dr. Dangler, who will ask you a question on the gold and diamond industry.
Well, before I get to the gold and diamond, I just want to key off on some related things here. Uh, the first was what Dr. Tara just said, that we're inviting back Rusal, who left, and we were hoping that they would come back. Now, if they were making losses before, what would make turn them profitable into the future? That's a big question we have to face with. We don't need losers. We can do that ourselves. So this comes back now to what Dr. Marjak Deo did. He retrained the workers. So part of the dynamics of change in an economy, as we are, rapid change, high economic growth, we must expect redeployment of labor, and it is compatible with the oil industry to retrain and redeploy bauxite workers into the oil industry. So we need to have a conscious plan that outlines a path for those who want to choose that, so that the dynamics of change in the labor markets would be compatible with what's happening on the ground in the real economy. Now, the one last thing about the life cycle approach. In 1983, we closed alumina, and so with cheaper power, we should consider whether that part of the operations can be revived or replaced, and we start moving from raw ore into finished metal. So that's something for the future to think about. So uh, on the whole, I would say that with Russell's experience, I was looking at that particularly. Uh, they we need a better contract that would help both labor and management. We must not tolerate losing companies, because if they lose and they can't make profit, then government can't collect profits tax to to create to build hospitals, schools, build roads, and to maintain those things. So the governments should have in its consolidated fund its full share of profits tax, and that's not uncommon in all of the countries. So we need to make sure that our models and our calculations include the government's responsibility. So later on, I will mention uh, a 7 R's, or rather the 6 R's, that could help to manage the mining sector in a better way. And this came about as a result of looking at the 2016 oil contract, both for Guyana and in Suriname. And so the 6 R's would be the rights of the guest company, the responsibility of the company to its employees, then the rewards. That's the third R of the fruits of the production, because from these rewards, the government gets its revenue to run the country. You can't just depend on the savings in the NRF to spend that in the current budget all the time. At some point, we have to have monies that flows directly to government to sustain the budget. Then we have the the fourth R would be uh, restoration. How do we restore the environment? Whose cost is that? We have to dredge the Berbice River. We have to do the water extraction from the mines if we're going to start there with Rusal. And whose cost is that? Government should have the funds to do that in its own budget. We should not have to take money from oil and spend it over there, especially because what will government do, let's say, to the rest of the economy, to the social sectors, schools, hospitals, roads, and maintenance? So government needs as much as it can get from these industries, and then the the sixth R would be recovery of assets. Now, the recovery of assets is very important. We find that Rusal attempted to uh, sell assets from the company. That's in one of the articles I read. Also, I was at the time when manganese closed. Haslin Paris was my boss, who later ran the bauxite company. Um, the, the news was in our department that the manganese company floated away key components of the plant on barges to some vessel that was waiting out at sea. So the recovery of assets should be part of a contract, a complete contract where all the parties, all the stakeholders' interests are bound together, and also, especially labor. The labor union management contract should be the Bible of the industry. Now, that leads me now to the gold situation.
Okay, Dr. Ganga, wait till Ambassador Hinds respond to those few issues
Okay,
that you
thank
raised,
you.
then you move on to your goal. Ambassador, go ahead.
Yes, Dr. Ganga has raised a number of issues there. Those are always factors that I would say, particularly the Ministry of Finance, would take into account. And for example, the various points at which you work. If you have an operation that has a huge natural advantage, and money comes easily, you're at one point. You may have a resource that is not so advantageous, and then the question is, what should you do with it? Should you allow it to be developed, and maybe should you give up taxes, direct taxes, and so to get employment? And the economists do their calculations, and that sometimes they would say, okay, in this situation, it's worthwhile for us to forego taxes and get the employment and get the workers, people employed and getting money. And being employed has a number of other positive effects versus being unemployed. Being employed, you have the workers have purpose, they have things to do, they have a sense of purpose and achievement. For example, in the case of bauxite, many times the authorities, the World Bank and the IMF, I think, argued, look, you're making so much of a subsidy to the bauxite. It's costing you $100 to get the bauxite on the ship, but you're only being paid $70. Why don't you just close down and give the people the money? Now, the counter to that is, yes, maybe we could do that, but the counter to that would be then you'd have so many people and their families and a place without any purpose, without anything to do. So there are many things that come into it. And the usual arrangement is that the people in office, the political people, eventually have to talk with everybody and then make some final decision. And let me just point out something that about OMI. OMI was developed, and when OMI was, I was at Bauxite Company when it was being developed, and that when there was a commitment to develop it, and there was a visit of the main shareholders and so on, and we talked about it, and they pointed out, look, in a typical mine like this, a gold mine like this, about 30%, the pay to workers and staff, the compensation payments would run about 20 to 30% of costs. But here in Guyana, in this Guyana situation, it will only be running at about 8% of costs. And you might say right away, oh, they are abusing our people in another place. But the point is, they also made the point that the OMI deposit, if it was in another country, it would not have been developed. It would have been left quite there. In fact, they told me that in Ireland there is a very similar deposit, but it couldn't be economic in Ireland. So
Yes.
so to some extent, OMI was maybe more an operation to provide employment to Guyanese at maybe twice the average rate at which Guyanese were being paid in Guyana at that time. That it was, if you look, you could look at it that way, that it was an opportunity to provide employment to Guyanese people at about twice the rate that they would have been employed in other places in Guyana at the time. But if that deposit was in a developed country, it would not have been developed because it would not have come out economic. So these questions need quite a bit of consideration, and that's what
Yeah.
quite a bit of
Dr. Ganga had also
There's no
asked-
simple. Many times the answer isn't very simple. It isn't a simple answer.
No, I understand. Decisions should be guided by economic consideration, but the political decision will be the ultimate arbiter.
Well, the political person makes a judgment.
Yeah.
Say, for example, should I leave OMI there and not develop it because they're paying my people, even though they're paying my people twice as much as anybody else in Guyana could pay them, it's only a third of what they would get if they were in Canada. But then if they were in Canada and get Canadian pay, overall the project would no longer be economic.
But he had asked you another
The
question.
judgment, the political people or the political process makes a final judgment. The engineers and the economists, as economists and all the other people, they bring the facts. And then judgments have to be made. You know, if it is the situation that it's so very attractive, then you get a simple answer. And let me say something too on bauxite as I recall it. When we got into office, Mr. Lewis and the chairman, what's his name again, Lincoln Lewis, and Mr. Kim Kisoon at the time, who's unfortunately passed on, they used to have a session, maybe a 2-day session every year with a bauxite. And about the third year in, I told them, and I said, look, my problem no more is with the bauxite. I'm not worrying about bauxite. My challenge now is to look and see, to develop other economic activities so that we could make a proper decision as to what we would do. If you only have bauxite, you can't do anything else. It's bauxite. But if you have other options, if you develop other options, then you can make choices as to what you would do. So the issues are much more thought has to go into many of these issues, and knowledge and facts.
All right.
And you are in different situations. There are different areas, you know, where you.
All right. So,
maybe.
Dr. Ganga, proceed with your the gold mining.
Yeah. Well, let me just say, the political decision making, that's very important to lift off the aircraft. But once it's airborne, you need the pilot, you need technical controls. That's where the technicians come in. So you need both the initial startup and then the piloting. Now, the the weaknesses that I see is our lack of tight contracts and contracts that keep our interests alive on the table. So those contracts should, of necessity, include modernization, especially when you're dealing with a high valued product like gold. All the glitter in gold would attract people so much, So modernization is important to monitor all aspects of gold movements. You look at movement of prisoners from one cell to the next. Tight security. You're moving also gold. When you look at what happened, how did 476 pounds of gold bars end up in Curacao? We were lacking controls. Then you have
Those
aircrafts moving in and out without scanners, without looking at what's in the mailbag, in order to monitor the movement of goals from point A to point B. So it's our carelessness in that area. And in terms of those R's, restoration is one of those. The cleanup costs in case of that cyanide spill, who, who bore that cost? And are there any outstanding royalty payments from the last operations at Omai? These are all things that could be handled with a proper contract that we can have control and monitoring over.
Well, let me just say that in the case of contracts, when we came into office, the PPPC, we were very critical of the OMI agreement and the agreement with Barama and the agreement with CLICO, because we said, one, we felt that we were not getting the best for Guyana, and two, we felt that the PNC had no moral standing and no right. And I think if you remember too, elections were due before the end of 1990. And I think many of these things were signed up in a period of time when normally governments, administrations would put a pause on doing new things. So we were critical of it. But when we got into office, we went through the process and we confirmed that the agreements were standard agreements that were prepared with consultants from the United Nations and from the Commonwealth Secretariat. And in fact, we laid those agreements in Parliament so they became public knowledge, and formally at least they became public knowledge. And we adopted those agreements for all the other subsequent arrangements that we would make. So the petroleum license that we entered in with ESO and with other people, that we were entering in with all sorts of people who came along, capable people who came along and wanted to prospect for anything. We used those standard agreements that had been developed with consultants out of the United Nations and also the Commonwealth Secretariat. So we had standard good agreements. I know that we would feel very particular about our gold and our oil and our wood and so on. And the issue always is, you mentioned it too, that the investor has to have sufficient rewards. In fact, I could tell you an interesting thing, that when we were first in office, 92 going on to 2000, and even further on till about 2005, we were being told by many of the multilateral institutions and many of the government people that we were asking too much in our agreements. Even though you have a model agreement, you can set some numbers as you choose. Say for royalty, you can ask 5% or you can ask 2% on gold, I'm talking. And there was a study done with help from someone of the institutions to compare our arrangements for gold investments with what is prevailing in the world. And at that time, our 5% was quite high, and many places had 2 and 3%. So it was that our take in our gold agreement was large compared with other places. And they were telling us, you should make it a little bit easier so that the investors coming with their money and technology and risking it, they would be more attracted. And that happened too with oil. And in fact, in 2011, they were telling us too in oil we were asking too much for oil. You should have more exploration going and so on and so on. And then in 2011, many people don't remember, we had three wells were to be drilled by CGX, Repsol, and Hunt Oil, I think, in the interior, in Latham area and Anna area, and everybody felt we would have hit oil in 2011. And those same multilateral institutions and government consultants, as they came along to see me, they would say, you know what? You got all of this interest now, and more or less, you must make sure you get enough. And I was smiling, and they said, what you can do, you reread the agreements, and you will find that you don't have to give as much as you thought at first that you had to give. And I smiled, and then they said, agreements should be broken, you know. They should be considered sacrosanct. They should be considered sacrosanct. But when you reread it, you might find you don't have to give as much as you thought you had to give at the beginning. And I smiled. But the lesson is there. The lesson I took out of it is, look, everybody wants as much as they could get. Initially, we were being told we're not giving enough to the investor. We are trying to extract too much out of it. And then when it looked like we were going to have something happening, then they turned around and said, well, you must now focus on getting as much as you could get. And maybe when you read the agreements, you might find you don't have to give as much, you can get more. So,
Yeah.
Just a quick,
Yeah. Ambassador, I know the oil contract is a very involved and complex issue. We can deal much more with that now, just in part because we still have to get a few minutes to talk about U.S.-Guyana international relations. And that links us to the recent visit of the Ghana presidential delegation to Washington. If you can please give us a brief on that, and then we'll have some time, 5 minutes or so, to take the two questions.
yes. Well, I think the visit went exceedingly well. The president led a team that met most of the sectors, the departments that are important. We met with Secretary of State, Mr. Anthony Blinken. We met with the deputy, let me just look and make sure I get it right. We met with the Deputy Secretary of Commerce, Mr. Don Graves, and we met with USAID. We met with a number of think tank groups, the Atlantic Council, amongst them. We were going to have a meeting with the Vice President, Ms. Harris. As it happened, we were not too long ago in Los Angeles. There was a meeting of CARICOM heads, including our President Ali, with a meeting scheduled with the Vice President, which the President was invited along and asked to come along, and he was there too. And our President Ali made I think a tremendous lead into having three committees set up to where the U.S. and Caribbean and the Dominican Republic would look more closely at food security, and that is responsibility of Guyana. Energy security, and in particular, it's going to less damaging, going towards green energy, and that's being led by Trinidad and Tobago. And the question of many questions with financing, including financing for climate change and issues of bank correspondence and so on, and that's being led by Barbados. So we had a very good meeting with the president and the vice president in Los Angeles, and we were scheduled for a meeting with the vice president here again to continue that, but it turns out that our VP, someone had gotten which had a positive check for COVID. And at the time, President Biden was in his first isolation for COVID. And so the decision was taken, rather than risk any further things, let us do it by call of conversation, telephone conversation. And that went quite well. I think the president was emphasizing that we want good relations with the U.S. We want to develop trade with the U.S. I guess in the case of petroleum, with the presence of ESSO and HES, we have very good relations with the U.S. We are important to the U.S. in that sense, and more attention certainly will be paid to the Guyana-U.S. relationship.
What about the U.S. Attitudes towards Guyana relationship with China? China is probably one of the biggest.
It so happens, maybe it's a good accident that consortium also includes CNOOC, the Chinese National Oil Company, and I think generally the message that we sent is that we want to be good friends, better friends with the U.S., and we want to be friends with everyone in the world. We want to work towards a shared world. We want to work towards a shared world. In fact, he said that we want to see more American companies, construction companies, putting in bids in our requests for companies to carry out the infrastructure that the infrastructure that we plan.
But
we want American companies bidding, and to support that, you would have read about the Exim Bank putting up $2 billion available for American firms that want to go to Guyana to do business, to make investments. So if a firm wants to go to Guyana and invest in something, they can get support from the Exim Bank to the extent of $2 billion in aggregate.
Finally, would you say this new relationship or the strengthening of relationship between Guyana and U.S. will compromise the sovereignty of Guyana in some ways?
Well, I would say no. The short answer is no. The longer answer is that in the world today, sovereignty doesn't mean what it meant maybe 50 or 100 years ago. In the world today, interdependence is the fact. Interdependence is a fact.
Okay. Thank you, Ambassador. Dr. Ganga, can you please make your last comment, make it as brief as possible so that we can accommodate the two questions?
Yeah, I'm going to be very brief. We have to rethink globalization. And in order to start that thinking, we could ask the question, would you outsource the soldiers' boots for the enemy country to make? Would you outsource your soldiers' boots for the enemy country to make? I think the computer chip that is going to be made in Silicon Valley is an answer to that. And I address these issues in my book, U.S. Export Incentives and Investment Behavior. That was the subject of my book that was published. And now it was written in 2003 for today. We have to go back to the fundamentals. Globalization is not all that glorious. Some flags will
I
rule the
may,
wave.
I may differ with you. I think certainly globalization ran away in front of people's feelings, but I think that it is on a pause, and I think it will be resumed because I think we're heading towards the one world, one human race idea. I don't see us turning back from it really. We're on that
All
route, but
all right.
it would have periods of pausing
Yeah,
and
yeah.
slowing and moving faster.
All right, Ambassador, I think we have to leave it there.
Okay.
Let's pass
Okay.
on this to Shamiza so she can pose the two questions to you to answer. Shamiza.
Yes. I'm not hearing Shamiza.
Shamiza, we're not hearing you.
Sorry
No,
about that. We will
Yes.
move on now to the first question, and it comes from Bunishwar Singh. He says, when will the people get their passport that is expired from the embassy in New York? 6 months now waiting for it to come back from Guyana. Please share some light on this issue.
I think the specific issue with passports is that because of COVID and so on, materials are not available. Maybe the passport books themselves are not available as we would like them to be. So I would like to ask that person to see it as part of the supply problems that we're aware of that followed COVID.
Okay, fair enough. And then our next question is from Asif Ali. His question is bauxite a sustainable resource and will it be around in Guyana in the next 10 years?
I think the operations that BOSAI is doing now looks good for 10 years. In fact, they've just added another kiln, calciner, making refractory calcined bauxite, which is different from the metallurgical use, alumina and metal. So I would think it is. Of course, always you have to have a price and a cost that is lower than the price. And
Right.
when you think that prices varies easily in these areas, maybe by 2 to 1, 3 to 1, you have a situation that it's not easy to predict exactly what will happen. Uh, so, but no company can run for any long time if it is not covering its costs. It has to be earning enough to cover its costs.
Okay. I thank you very much for answering those questions. Mr. Hinds, I will now ask you for your closing remarks.
Okay, thank you very much. I think the main thing is that we want to look to the future. In fact, let me say the main emphasis in the presentations of our president during his week trip is that we must look to the future. Yes, we have a past that didn't go so well, but look to the future. Let us educate ourselves and equip ourselves to do well in the future. We have income coming in from oil, and we're going to use it right away to look towards after oil. We're going to use it to improve our people in our investments in health and education and infrastructure, so that, and also he made a big commitment. He speaks all the time that we are going to develop the economy broadly. We're going to work at developing the economy broadly, agriculture, other mining, woodwork, services, call centers. We speak recently about maybe setting up a surveying institute in Guyana, and so on. So we have the fortune of having found this oil, and we must use this oil to develop ourselves for the future.
Thank you very much. Now, there is no doubt that Guyana is a blessed country. When we speak of blessings, we speak of our natural resources, and Guyana has many. And I am proud that being a Guyanese, I've grown up knowing about all these natural resources. And many of us are very proud to be from a country that has so many natural resources.
I'd like to inject one thing, ma'am.
Yes, please go
Get
ahead.
the resources. People are the most important.
Important resource. I
Forget the
agree.
resources. People are the most important, and that is why we're spending lots of money on health and education in particular. Health and education in
Because we
particular.
need strong people and we need our kids to grow up to be healthy so that they can take over where we left off. With that said, tonight we heard facts about our natural resources. A lot of time was spent on really getting to know a lot about bauxite and where that industry is going. I thank all of you for being here this evening. To our viewers, thank you for being here. To our moderators, thank you very much for your questions and your interactions. And to His Excellency, Mr. Samuel Hinds, thank you so much for being here. Until next time, have a pleasant evening.
Thank
Good
you very
evening,
much.
everyone.
Thank you very much.
Thank
Thank
you.
you
Good
very
evening.
much.
Good evening.